Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so today we're going to be taking a look at Mutant class. I have broken down every single class. Mutant class is the last one left, and it is for a very good reason, because it is by far the biggest nightmare of my recent days, trying to actually find common characteristics that unite Mutant champions, because there are none. But we're going to get to that in a bit. First, we can still go through over some interesting factoid bits about mutants. So I will jump to the other side of the screen. We're going to once again use my website that provides us with a wonderful tool by going over champion abilities, tags, and things like that. So as we can see, mutant class consists of 36 champions, of whom 23 are hero champions, 7 are villains, and 7 are mercenaries. And that is obviously largely thanks to X amounts of Deadpool variants, Gold Pool, Platinum Pool, Deadpool X-Force, what have you. That basically is main source of mercenaries in the mutant class. Right, there is one champion that is double dipping, and it is up to you to figure out which one it is. So he has more than one tag. In this case, he has hero and mercenary tag. Right, let's go over some more interesting bits. Now, interestingly, there are actually only 3 mutant champions that are fully properly bleed immune, which actually surprised me. Reason being is because there are many more mutant champions that are either pseudo bleed immune or almost bleed immune, or have additional ways of how to deal with bleed debuffs. For instance, Omega Red and Magneto both are 90% bleed immune, which does not count as full immunity. Now, how Apocalypse, who goes bleed immune after 8 seconds, once you have had a bleed debuff placed on you. We have Domino, who can shrug off bleed effects. Emma Frost, who can go bleed immune if she's in her diamond phase. We have Rogue, that shrugs bleed effects off quicker. We have Namor, that reflects the bleed damage. We have Mr. Sinister. We have Jubilee, that can throw the bleed debuffs back at the opponent, basically. And even further, there are only 2 poison immune champions, and overall, I must definitely say that Mutant class does not really like or interact much with poison debuffs, as there are many champions who deal extremely well with bleed debuffs, and some of the same mechanics obviously would help against poison debuffs as well, but overall, at large, there are nowhere nearly as many poison debuff counters, so to speak, in Mutant class, and there are only 2 fully poison immune champions in the game in Mutant class. But then again, we have like the Emma Frosts and whatever else that can just go poison immune or throw them back at opponents. On top of that, Mutant class is actually very well covered in pretty much every other aspect of immunity, largely thanks to champions like Colossus, Emma Frost. Then we have additional immunities with Iceman, with Apocalypse, so on and so forth. So there is plenty of immunities to go around in Mutant class, and if you are looking for immunity for a specific debuff, then there normally will be a couple of mutants that are there to answer the call. Also, quite interestingly, 5 out of 7 characters in this game that have psychic shielding, that is a relatively new mechanic, and has actually been properly used within that phrase only for Stripes mechanics, I believe, but it's probably going to be more prominent in the game in near future. So there we go. 5 out of 7 psychic shielding champions are in Mutant class, and that is largely to do with the whole helmet thing, right? And we all know who are the other 2 that are not mutants but help psychic shielding. Those would be Unstoppable, Colossus, and Juggernaut. Right. Also, when it comes to the trait group of the class, and this is about as common of a characteristic as I can possibly find for mutant class, is that vast majority of mutant champions are considered offensive champions, either offensive damage over time or offensive burst. There are 26 champions in mutant class that sport offensive tags. Only 10 of them are actually sporting defensive tags, and just 4 champions have control elements involved to it. So Mutant is very focused on damage for most part, but that isn't much. That isn't giving us concrete kind of like breakdown of the class. And no matter where I was looking, I couldn't find one properly. We can go on with the fact that, for instance, every damage over time debuff under the sun can be found in Mutant class as well. There are about 18 champions who inflict bleed. There are 2 cold snap, 3 incinerates, 2 poisons, 4 shocks, 5 degens, which is probably the largest of all classes. So there we go, pretty much every damage over time effect is present, but none of them is overly dominant. Half of the mutants have access to bleed, but that's not really enough to say that that is the characteristic of the class. Heck, we even have the one non-science power sting option here in M Frost. Right, so what are the strengths? What are the commonalities? There are none. And the best way to go about it is, let's take a look. Most people think it's prowess buffs, right? Well, first of all, that's not even really a great common ability compared to rest of the classes, because prowess buffs in their essence are just shitty version of furies, but typically you do have them more potent and easily accessible than powerful fury buffs. But even that, by themselves, there are only 12 mutants that have access to a prowess buff in this game. So that would make 1/3 of the champions in the class. So 2/3 have nothing to do with the prowess really. By comparison, I would be better off saying that regen is a dominant aspect of a mutant class, which it isn't really, because only 15 champions, still more than prowess, but not half, have access to regeneration abilities. So they are frequently present, but they're definitely not enough to call them a common characteristic, in my opinion. And what's next? As I mentioned, we have 18 champions capable of inflicting bleed. Now, that is as close as we can come to a common characteristic, but it just isn't. It just isn't good enough, because half of the class does not count or represent the other half here. What else we have? We have 10 champions that can reduce opponents' ability accuracy, but again, that is less than 1/3. Still a very large number by comparison of most other classes, but it's not really what mutants are famous for. And there we go. Mutants exist in kind of their own little world, where they by themselves pretty much do a bit of everything, which is an amazing quality for a class to have, but it is also a very big downside, because if a champion is typically good for everything, it's good for nothing. And the best evidence there is Jubilee. She has a ton of different abilities, and none of them are just impactful enough. And as a class in the game, mutants obviously are loved and ever so present, but when it comes to the tippy top cornerstones of the game, they're nowhere near as dominant than they theoretically should be. They're not the most used AW class for defense or offense. They are not most used AQ class, and even in casual questing, even though they do have some great options for quick casual fights like Omega Red, like Archangel, like Colossus, they're not really the most popular options, because they lag behind champions like Ghost, champions like Corvus, Cosmic Ghost Rider, and a few others for like split blitz damage dealing. So that is kind of my, I don't know, idea approach to mutant class. They're pretty much good at everything, and as a class, they definitely also have the least obvious or least amount of weaknesses, because as a class, they can pretty much deal with any other class champions, and that by default should make them the strongest class of the game. But I'm not sure whether they really are performing as the strongest class in the game. They're certainly not dominating Alliance Wars, they're certainly not dominating Alliance Quest, and they're certainly not dominating tough content questing as well, in my opinion. But they do well in every single one of those aspects, and I by no means want to undersell mutant class. By the amount of amazingly, insanely strong and powerful champions, they definitely are far ahead of anything else, and especially now, which is one of the biggest strong sides of mutant class, and something that I can definitely put in front of you. And that is the fact that mutant class juices up the best. Mutant class has the best roids. Mutant class has the best synergy teams, and that is a fairly new development. It didn't start like that. It has only happened with the release of Apocalypse, rework of Magneto, White Magneto, and the release of Professor X. Now, in between those 3 champions, plus any other champions that offer mutant unique specific synergies, pretty much any mutant in the game can perform as well, if not better, than mid to relatively high tier champion from any other class. You can literally take Deadpool X-Force if you make him a Horseman of Apocalypse, if you ramp up Professor X Synergies, put in a White Magneto there, and voila. All of a sudden, Deadpool X-Force is not a dud. All of a sudden, he would be better than majority of the champions in any other class if you do spend the time and effort to juice a champion up. And it certainly works great for showcasing champions and stuff like that. It's not really, again, the most practical thing because the approach where we can dedicate 4 champion slots to make one champion amazing is not really working currently in Malcolm's of Champions. When you do prepare for a quest team, you do need to prepare multiple solutions for multiple problems. And overall, though, I definitely must say that Mutant class has the best synergy potential in the game. Where yes, you can make a champion that stands here into a champion that looks amazing compared to majority of the other champions in the game, and that is something to be reckoned with. Because when you do get that mutant whose abilities perfectly fit the job that you are trying to do, you can make that mutant incredibly powerful. The one biggest weakness I suppose I could give to mutant champions, but truth to be told, they even overcome that relatively well, is that not a single mutant champion strictly has any buff control. And that is not the most common ability, but still, it's present in Cosmic class, it's present in Mystic class, it's present in some miniature forms in other classes as well. Now, best Mutant class can do is use champions like Magneto, Archangel, to basically lower opponent ability accuracy to prevent the buffs from activating altogether. But in general, Mutant class is quite light on slow debuff, and whereas they do have more than enough options on bypassing away defects, because Professor X can do that, Archangel does that really well, Apocalypse can do that, we have Storm, Pyramid X, and Iceman who can prevent evades, I believe Jubilee can do it to a degree, and several other champions. Pretty much nothing outside of Jubilee is having a proper access to a slow debuff or any meaningful way how to prevent an unstoppable buff from absolutely slowing down the fights. But even with that, Mutant class is one of those classes that are relatively well equipped to just wait out and pause the fight and not having to all the time consider clock watching, for instance. With Havoc, you can just stall while still advancing your game plan on building up plasmas. Apocalypse or Archangel, you can just let damage or time effects do their work, so on and so forth. Though, even though Mutant class technically doesn't have any way to deal with unstoppables properly, they still manage to get around it, and that would have been like as one biggest thing that Mutant class overall has to worry. For Pete's sake, Mutant class is pretty much the only class that can actually very effectively work around the class that has natural advantage over them being tech class, largely thanks to champions like Magneto and White Magneto here, but thanks to a couple of others as well. So overall, Mutant class is a very, very strange case, and I know that they are extremely loved, but fact of the matter is that they do not possess single common weaknesses or strengths as a class because they're just too random. They do a bit of everything. They have an access to a bit of almost everything, and many of them solve different problems and are champions for different scenarios. So, for some of the MVPs and some of the tips and tricks, so we're gonna start with MVPs, and again, Mutant class is the most stacked by far, bar none, in terms of how many amazing champions the class has. I'm gonna list about 10-15 champions. That's more than any other class could, and I'm probably still gonna miss somebody out. So my top 5 mutants, in no particular order right now, would be APOC, Archangel, Colossus, Magneto, and Omega Red. I think those are 5 best mutants that each do something completely different and extremely unique. Therefore, it's also actually very hard to compare them in between one another. But then obviously we have champions like Namor, like Havoc, like Emma Frost, like White Magneto, like Sunspot, like Storm Pyramid X, like Professor X, like Gambit. And again, as I said, I'm probably even missing some champions out, like Cable with Apex Energy. Because Mutant Class does have a ton of amazing options. Right. In addition to that, the thing that I do like a lot about Mutant Class is within that variety, there are several champions that fit perfectly many different conditions and game modes. And again, even though, as I said, mutant class are not the dominant class of Alliance Quest, they're not the dominant class of Alliance War, they do always have some players, some champions that play meaningful roles in them. And even when it comes to questing, we have champions like Archangel, like Colossus, like Omega Red, who are amazing for short to medium level fights, where all of these champions offer a great deal of utility and super high damage output that you can access very early in the fight. Therefore, they are very good for casual questing. And then we have champions like Apocalypse with Stripe synergy, like Stripe, like Magneto, and a whole bunch of others, Domino even, Professor X, that are very good for long piece of content where your main objective is to deal a lot of damage in very long fight, basically, because they do have a significant ramp up. The best tip and the coolest thing personally, I think, that is still being very underappreciated overall about Mutant class is the fact that Mutant class is the only class where you can make literally any single champion a suicide friendly champion. Mutant class is the only class that can actually change the status effects of bleeds and poisons to a degree where you end up healing every fight. And that's also was pretty much the secret why, for instance, it's very easy to do a Labyrinth of Legends run with Colossus without using 0 items. Why? Because you heal throughout the run like crazy, as it's like every mutant can turn into Deadpool to a degree. And you obviously achieve that by making a mutant Horseman of Apocalypse, which lets them take no damage from bleed effects, and you heal from initial bleed from Double Edge. And then we have Professor X, who has synergy with Wolverines and Colossus that reduce the amount of poison damage you take. With 4 Professor X charges, you can reduce poison damage by 72%, which effectively lets you heal constantly throughout all of the fights remaining in the quest if you're running Suicide Masteries and you're using a mutant champion. And I absolutely love that. That me as a player who loves to run Suicide Masteries, that's a very satisfying feeling to know that I at any given point can take any mutant champion and juice him up to the gills and run Suicide Masteries on top of it to give him even more damage. So that is a really cool thing, and it's a very awesome setup that you can make for yourself. And yeah, that is about it. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure what has happened different with Mutant class compared to every other class, because every other class has very specific group identity. Tech class, we have armor ups, we have heal block, we have power drain. 3 very distinctive qualities. Then we have skill champions with damage or time effects, with shrugging things off, and with ability accuracy reduction or a weight prevention or something. And Mystic class, power and buff control mainly. Every class has something. Mutants have a bit of everything, but I do personally think that initially mutant champions were meant to be these regen champions that deal damage over time, just like Wolverine, just like Deadpool, Cable. Most of the older mutant champions do embody the idea of having regen and having damage over time effect. And then it kind of got abandoned, and most of the most recently released mutant champions have access to prowess or do some weird random things. Generally have no clue what went different with mutant class, why the idea changed, or what is even the current idea behind mutant class, because having prowess isn't really a common characteristic, I would say, or not good enough. So I don't know. This one is a very, very weird one, and I tried very hard for days to come up with some common qualities, but I really couldn't, because there aren't. Mutants are so different, so diverse, and amazing. Which ultimately I do think is their strong side and their weak side as well. I do think that having no 1 or 2 specialty things to focus on overall has helped and hurt mutant class at the same time. Anyways, that is about it about today's video. And I can already hear this video as pointless videos coming in the comment section. But I didn't, and I couldn't, and I wouldn't, and shouldn't leave the mutant class out. So there we go. anyways, that is about it, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information